Today we'll be treating on indices. Now, before we dive into indices, the first thing we need to know about is what is indices. Now, some authors define indices as is a method of shortening the product of numbers of equal factors or numbers that are the same. Now, from this definition, indices is a method of shortening the product of numbers of equal factors or numbers that are the same. For example, i.e., if we should have a times a times a, it is said to be the third power of a, in which a will be raised to power 3. It's a raised to power 3. It is called the third power of a. Now also, if we should have another example, a times a times a times a, it is said to be called the fourth power of a, which is a raised to the power of 3. Where this power here is called power, index, or exponent. Now, when we are treating indices, we should know that we are all talking about powers. Now, this is the singular form of power, index, and exponent. Now, when we are not dealing with higher power, multiple powers, we're not talking about the plural form of this power, which the plural form of power is powers. The plural form of index is indices. Because whenever we are treating indices, we are simply talking about powers. We are simply talking about powers. Now, there are some certain laws that govern the operation of indices. And these laws are stated. Let's look at the laws of indices. Laws of indices. The first law of indices, we have what we call the multiplication law. That is the product, open bracket, multiplication law. The product multiplication law is simply saying that if we should have a base, let's say base A, raised to a certain power, m, multiplied by the same base, A, raised to a certain power, n. The result is, provided the two bases are the same, all we just need to do is just pick one of the base and add their powers together, which is A raised to power n plus L. Now here, we call this power, where this A is called the base. Now, for example, if we should have 2 raised to power 2 multiplied by 2 raised to power 1, it is the same as writing, provided the bases are the same, all we just need to do is pick one of the base and add their powers together, which is base 2. They will add their powers, 2 plus 1, which gives us 2. 2 plus 1 is 3, and 2 raised to power 3 is 8. Now, the next law of indices is what I call the quotient, open bracket, division law. Now, the quotient law is simply saying that we should have a base, a raised to the power m, divided by the same base, a raised to the power n, that the result is, provided the base are the same, pick one of the what? Base, then subtract their powers, which is m minus n. For example, if we should have 3 raised to the power 3 divided by 3 raised to the power 2, that the result is, provided the bases are the same, we pick one of the base, then subtract their powers, which is 3 minus 2, which gives us 3, because the power here is what? 1. 3 raised to the power 1 is still 3. Now, the next law is what the power depicted multiplication law. Now, from the power law is simply saying that if you have a base raised to a certain power, m, also raised to another power, n, that the result is bring out the base, then multiply their power, which is m, n. For example, if you have 2 raised to the power 2, raised to power 2 again, it is simply bringing out this base, multiply their powers together, which is 2 times 2. Which gives us 2 raised to the power, 2 times 2 is what? 4. Then 2 raised to the power 4 is 16. The next law is what I call the zero index law. Zero index law. The zero index law is simply saying that any alphabet or number raised to power 0 is 1, meaning any alphabet raised to power 0 is 1, or any base raised to power 0 is 1. Then the next law is what I call the negative index law. From the word negative, it's showing that the power has a negative sign. Now, what a negative law is simply saying that any base raised to a negative power now, the negative index law is simply saying that any base raised to any negative power, that the result is take the inverse of it, which is 1 over a raised to power n. That is simply what's negative index law. From the word index. Index is another name for power or exponent. Now, for example, if I should have 2 raised to power negative 3, my result is simply 1 over 2 raised to power 3. You won't bring out the negative sign again, because we have taken the inverse of it, which will give us 1 over 2 raised to power 3 is 8. Now, the next law is what I call the power sharing law. Some textbook calls it the product power law, but I call it the power sharing law. Power sharing law. The power sharing law is simply saying that we should have different base that is raised to a particular power. For example, if you have 3abc raised to power 2. You can see from the word power sharing law, it means that this power here is distributed across each of the base, which means if you have to write this, that the result can be written as 3 raised to power 2, a raised to power 2, b raised to power 2, c raised to power 2. That is simply what the power sharing law is simply stating. Now, the next law is what I call the root law. The root power law. The root power law. From the definition, from this root power law is simply stating that the power half, meaning 1 over 2. That means if we should have a base A, raised to half, that is 1 over 2, that the result is simply the square root of A. For example,